Good evening. Today is the 4th of June here in Vancouver at the BC LaRouche chapter of the International LaRouche Movement. All right, tonight we have a complete revolution that is taking place that has no precedent in the history of humanity, and my intention tonight is to give you a sense of this. It is spectacular, yet the news has not yet arrived for the U.S. and Canadian population. And we don't know if even if the news did arrive for the U.S. and Canadian population, that they would find any emotional connection to the news. But it will arrive to the Canadian and U.S. population. It may take a while for it to penetrate the dense fog, but it is coming. Now, I'll start with the case of a gentleman who is a Yemeni. He's a gentleman in Yemen. He's not a government official. He's not some military leader. His name is Fawad al-Ghafani, and he created a private organization called the Advisory Office for Coordination with the BRICS. And we might have a discussion on creating something like that in Canada. The advisement, because we'll discuss it later.
It's so exciting.
because it's not an official government agency. It's just helping the process. And he got a hold of this from our friend in Sweden, the Iraqi Hussein Askari. He translated the Lambridge report, and he began doing televised public readings of the report, bringing a lot of people in to be participant in the reading publicly. And eventually, after a few months, he was asked to speak to a conference of about 500 to 700 people in Yemen, in the capital of Sana'a, on something called the National Forum for Financial Assessment, which involved the entire Ministry of Finance, the military leader of the rebels, with the last name Houthi, and other major government officials, including the Prime Minister, and civil society organizations and what have you. And in his presentation, he proposed, because one of the things that they were doing was discussing how they were going to approach the issue of resolving the conflict through negotiations, which are going on in Kuwait, between the so-called rebels, the Houthi rebels, and the alleged government of Yemen in exile. Okay, the so-called Houthi rebels, and so he proposed 4 recommendations that should be put in to the discussion of ending the conflict. One of those was for Yemen to become part of the New Silk Road. Another one was for Yemen to join the BRICS. A third one was for Yemen to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the fourth one was that Yemen must establish a national bank of reconstruction, run by Yemen, of course, to help finance rebuilding Yemen, because of, well, it needed to be built anyhow, but now it really needs to be built. And especially when you consider that 2.8 million people have been displaced by the war waged upon Yemen by Saudi Arabia with the assistance of the British and the United States, with with probable involvement of a number of U.S. troops. And so now, of these four, three were adopted and to be put on the table as part of the negotiations demands. It was all minus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, this is profound. Not because it's an immediately an earth-shaking thing in and of itself, but it's profound because you have ideas coming to a person who decides to take initiative and intersects the situation. Now, he did have a meeting with the Russian ambassador at the airport, and the chargé d'affaires, of course the Russian ambassador can't be in Sana because of whatever, so the chargé d'affaires in Sana is supposed to stay in touch with him. Now, what's significant about this is that the last two times we had this kind of approach to try to resolve these kind of conflicts was the original Oasis plan by LaRouche in the late 70s to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which he was organizing for in the late 70s, and it was also going to be part of the Reagan administration. And the idea was establish an economic orientation so that you have the basis for the warring parties to have a mutual benefit or a mutual reason to want to surmount whatever differences they have. In other words, create the common basis for, in the economics, to override all the other ethnic, religious, or whatever issues, right? Now, in the Palestinian conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, LaRouche met with the former foreign minister of Israel, Abba Eban, who said, hey, this would work except for one thing. And LaRouche asked him, well, why? He says, you do not appreciate the quality of insanity that exists in the highest places of...
The quality of insanity.
Yes, that exists in the highest places of power.
No, most people don't.
And the Iraqis supported it privately, but we can't do it publicly because of the hatred for Israel. And so we organized for this thing. Eventually, when Clinton came in, this approach actually was put in the Oslo Accords. The initial Oslo Accords were based upon an economic policy, and then an agreement was made between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and eventually Bibi Netanyahu came to power, that was the end. But there was another factor, is that the International Monetary Fund intervened and wrecked all of the economic agreements that would have created Palestinian-Israeli benefit to the point where they would override the manipulation of, the manipulation. So this is, now, the point about this current situation is that the International Monetary Fund ain't around for this. You have the new entities coming in, the new development bank, and so forth and so on, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's a whole different world. That's not the old IMF, which screwed this whole thing up. It was that, plus the assassination of Rabin, prevented an actual process whereby the Palestinians and the Israelis would now be living together, and they wouldn't be having all these issues, because they would be benefiting, because Israel has a high-tech engineering capability, and the Palestinians have also very, very skilled labor force. I mean, they would be an industrial engine for the area, but it didn't happen just because of Israelis or Palestinians, but because the international crowd sabotaged Clinton's President Bill Clinton, who was in favor of this, but he was too weak to carry it through, to override the international party. He was too weak. So, now, if you look at Yemen, a place that is not on the radar screen of most Americans, if probably not on the radar screen of all Americans and most Canadians. It's a very strategically located place on the coast, going into the Red Sea, going into the Suez Canal, and going out to the main oil lanes. It's a very strategic place, number one. Number two, it has been a place of confrontation and war, initially between the Cold War. It was a battleground. It was a battleground during the Cold War, okay, and then it became a battleground later on. And just to give you a sense of this, an offshoot of the main Shia religious group, which became known as Zaydism, established in the 10th century a ruling system based on an imam, a hereditary imam. And that continued on into the modern period. And that's in the northern part. And this northern imam initially joined with Egypt, Iraq, and Syria into what's called the United Arab Republic. There was an attempt to create a United Arab Republic of these four countries. Well, in my view, they probably should have just tried to be United Arab Friends rather than United Arab Republic, because it got to be a mess, with Egypt involved in the politics of Syria and Iraq and political parties and everything else. And then the West launched a war against these people, against this inside, and then there was all kinds of things happened. It got very confused. But the point is that this situation was never resolved. And what made it worse is that the Saudis in their repressive society have to deal with 1 million of these people inside their own borders, who they have suppressed. And so they have a suppression of these people inside their own borders. So that's another factor in all of this. Regardless of all those factors, the point is that if you're going to resolve these conflicts, this is the way to go. And if you're going to resolve similar conflicts in Africa, this is the way you're going to do it. You're not going to do it by demonizing your enemy. You're going to do it by going to your enemy and saying, look, let's cut the crap. You know, what are we doing? Who are we working for? You know, we're not working for our nation. We're not working for our people. You know what? You know, you're working for whatever, your Swiss bank account. I'm working for, you know, this is the whole idea. The whole idea is this. And I say this because other people are getting these kind of ideas. And it's not something that just the Chinese are doing. It's everyone is saying, okay, this is an opportunity to break out of this paradigm of a permanent war. You know, a permanent, religious war and every other kind of war. Now, so this conflicts greatly with the typical type of negotiations you have. Like the negotiations they had with Libya. They put in this thing that nobody knows what it is, right? As a coalition government. It's not even a coalition. These negotiations, well, we're going to have these rules, we're going to have those rules, we're going to have this rule, we're going to negotiate this, we're going to negotiate that, but you're not solving any problems. Because you're destroying the country. You destroyed Libya, you destroyed Iraq, you destroyed Syria. But so now what are you going to solve? You're only going to solve this through economic development. And so this is the LaRouche approach, going back to the late 70s and early 80s. But it's coming back with entities that are not criminal and are not going to sabotage I'll be out to destroy and sabotage any potential for this. Now, in this context, I'm going to now discuss something very big that has begun to happen. It's immense. It's causing the Obama administration to go completely berserk. It's causing the British to go completely berserk. And that is, there's a shift in Japan. There's a shift in Japan. Now in 2011, in October 2011, when the Obama administration put forward the Asian pivot, the cornerstone of the Asian pivot was Japan. And the idea was to take the difficult issues of China and Japan, which have a long history of a century, and exploit those to create a revived Japanese imperial mindset, including changing the Japanese constitution so the Japanese can participate with the U.S. in war.
And nuclear weapons as well.
And nuclear weapons. And this also plays into the Korean situation with North Korea, setting up the preemptive nuclear warfare capability through the development of the BMD systems in Korea, which initially the Koreans opposed. But now, because of flare-ups in North Korea, they've gone along with it. So Japan is an absolute critical part of the Asia pivot, but also of the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I would say it's the anchor of the Asia.
Yeah.
It's the anchor.
It's the anchor. Right. And the TPP is only P without Japan. Excuse me, I made that up just now. Okay, so anyhow, so now I think the TPP has been delayed somewhat in Japan, as it's being delayed in the U.S. And so this is very crucial. Now, so how did this happen? And I'm going to also go through the basic history of it, and then I'm going to go through the actual developments. Now, what happened is that Japan has shifted to work with Russia. And by shifting to work with Russia, they go around the problems they have with China. But Russia is massively expanding and consolidating its economic relationship at the same time with China. So if Japan is moving with Russia, it's indirectly, if not directly, moving with China, without saying so.
But they're the buffer.
Huh?
They're the buffer between.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, this also allows Russia to mediate the whatever tensions or hostilities between the two, not the United States.
Would you call that a brilliant flank?
By yes. Yes.
That's a flank.
That's a flank. That's a flank by Putin, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Now, so this is freaking out the Obama administration, like the action in Syria by Putin, because it wasn't expected that the Russians would move in this direction to undermine in Asia the whole Asian pivot. Now, what I'm going to go through now is a digression to the basic history behind all of this, and needed in order to get a sense of the magnitude of this shift. Okay. When when Ieyasu established the shogunate in the late 1500s, they kicked out all the missionaries, they cut off all communication with the West. And they became very isolated. And they did that because they didn't want to be disrupted by foreign influences in their extremely insular culture, and the extremely insular culture that the Japanese have. You have to imagine this for yourself. Okay. So up until the 1850s, roughly 300 to 250 years, Japan remained this extremely insular place with a feudal order of lords and samurais and the court at Edo, which is now Tokyo, and extremely insular. However, there was a Dutch ship coming in to Nagasaki once a year, and they would bring books about scientific books and various other books about what was going on in Europe, and a small grouping of individuals calling themselves the Dutch Translation Society began to prepare for the inevitable reality that at some point that isolation would be forced to an end. And it was forced to an end when Admiral Perry came into the harbor with these very advanced, I don't know if it wasn't steam, but maybe it was, I don't know.
Yeah, it's there, steamships.
Okay, it was it was a naval vessel, and with guns and the whole 9 yards. And this was the trigger for the reality of the outside world coming into Japan, extremely insular, coming into the outside world. And then what happened was a series of things started to happen where the shogun was replaced by the emperor. Now you have to understand the way they did things in Japan was the emperor is divine. So if you can't overthrow the emperor, but you can put him in you can give him a court somewhere and keep him there, and he has no power. And then the shogunate would run the shogunate would be run out. One would be in another part of Japan. The shogunate would be run out of would run the show. The emperor would have no say in anything. He's just there as a symbolic figure. And so what happened was they organized to bring this young guy who was the heir to the throne, who would have had no say in anything, to come in and become the actual ruler of Japan, that was the Meiji Restoration. And this young guy was amenable to the full industrialization of Japan. And they brought in American advisors, and they pensioned off the samurai as they made these reforms. And then later, the samurai rebelled, only to find themselves being wiped out by a modern army of peasants trained by U.S. Union officers. And so what happened to Japan from then to 1894 is that the Japanese went through this incredible industrial transformation under the direction of this core grouping, which had seized power through the mechanism of bringing the emperor in. There's one problem. The emperor didn't live past 1894. People don't live forever. His son coming in opened the door for the British to start a massive campaign, or they started it before then, to convince the Japanese that they were an island empire, like Britain. And that And this appeal to the Japanese, insular Japanese chauvinism, this insularity that existed in Japan, it appealed to them. And so the Japanese first conquest was Korea and Taiwan, what is now Taiwan, and then Manchuria, and then a war with Russia, 1905. And this was all organized by the British. And the financial power of Great Britain funded the military, funded and supported, and then later also Wall Street funded and supported the rise of Japan as a military empire. This was funded by the West, much like, just like, ISIS is today, right? And so now the Japanese have this war with Russia, and you have this gradual takeover of Manchuria, and then the war with China, which occurred before, which went into full motion before the war in Europe. And 50 million Chinese died, civilians died in this war.
To that point, Paul, the Japanese were let off very lightly in terms of human rights violations, in terms of genocide, in terms of everything. They were not brought to court, they were not brought into account for any of that, and were let go. And that mentality still exists today.
That's what, you're going ahead of me. So anyhow, now after World War II, MacArthur came in and revived the earlier tradition that ended in 1894, the American development tradition. And what happened was Japan underwent an economic miracle transformation, and however, with the end of the Reagan and later Clinton administrations, but even before, the British were at work bringing back the insular Japanese imperial tradition. Okay. So this is not something that was yesterday. It's not something it's something that's been part of world history since the Japanese opened up in the 1850s. Now, during the 70s, the Japanese were absolutely committed to third world development, much like FDR was, or even Kennedy. And the Japanese had, their saying was, the lead geese leading the flock, meaning that their development then feeds back into Asia, they develop, and then Japan develops, and Asia develops, and Japan develops. This was their conception. And they invited Lyndon LaRouche to meet with their top people in economics and planning in the 70s, in Japan, sitting down with this group. And Lyndon LaRouche was a little, and his entourage were a little bit shocked, because they're going to sit down and meet with the top people, MITI, Ministry of Industry and Planning. And there's like maybe 10 people. And these are the people running the plans, the long-term planning and development of Japan and their relationship in this the lead geese leading the flock. And so they discussed with LaRouche all these projects that we're talking about today. And the Japanese were gung-ho. And the Japanese were working with Portillo in Mexico, and before that Echeverria in Mexico, because they saw Mexico as an incredible potential. Because the Mexicans' revolution had established an educational system in Mexico which created a significantly educated, potentially skilled population, and a potential for an industrial revolution in Mexico was very great. And the Japanese wanted to be part of that because that is how they were developed. That's how they were essentially going to survive. They were not going to survive as an empire. They were going to survive to do this. And Zbigniew Brzezinski made a statement, we will have no Japan south of the border. And all kinds of political things were occurring in Japan because the U.S. had a tremendous influence in Japan because they were the conquerors. And they pulled the plug on a number of governments. And one of the key turning points was the Plaza Accords. And what the Japanese ended up doing was essentially being told, okay, we'll give you the automobile market in the United States in exchange for backing off from developing Mexico and doing all this stuff. We'll give you an export market because you need an export market, but you're not going to develop in these countries. You're especially not going to develop Mexico. And so essentially there was a shift, there's been a shift back and forth inside inside Japan. And this is now coming to a head at this moment. Because in the early 90s, the Japanese bent over backwards and bailed out the financial system. They've been bailing out the financial system in a number of different ways. All the while trying to preserve their industrial base. But now, what? Now they're being asked to participate in a war against China. And they're being forced into it. With elements in Japan that are, that have this mentality. So the Russians come in to break that environment. And that's very significant. This is very, very significant. This is going to have incredible blowback. Now, so that's the background history. Now, on May 6th, there was a summit with Putin, between Abe and Putin in Sochi. And despite incredible pressure from the Obama administration and from Obama personally to force Abe to cancel the trip, Abe went to Sochi. And the agreements were discussed to involve Japanese investment on a massive scale in the Siberian Far East Russia, in oil, gas, transportation, ports, etc. Now, this is also designed to have an effect on Korea. And because you have this place where North Korea, Russia, and China come together. This is the area of development they're talking about. And there's a bonus potential in North Korea because they do have a skilled workforce that you can integrate into this whole developmental process. So essentially you're bringing China, Japan, South Korea, and Russia together around these development projects just north of North Korea, which then spills over into North Korea. And then on May 19th and May 20th, Russia met with the Southeast Asian nations in Sochi. And they labeled the conference, you got to get this, they labeled the conference, toward a strategic partnership for the sake of the common good. Not geopolitics. The common good. No empire, the common good. And so this is the flank. Now, at this meeting in Sochi, all kinds of discussions were had with the Vietnamese, the Philippines, but also the Indonesians and all the others. And all kinds of agreements were being discussed with the Russians. Now, mind you, the United States under Obama has arm-twisted every country in Southeast Asia, every country, to join the TPP, to go against China, to line up around the South China Sea. It's massive, massive, massive pressures being placed on all these countries, and they're all they don't want to say no to the United States because God knows what operations are going to be run against your government, you know, and God knows what is going to happen to you. You don't know who's going to get assassinated. You want to be polite. Yes, we will. Yes, we agree. China's a bad guy. Yeah. We agree. China's a bad guy. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And along comes Russia and says, well, work with us. Work with us. Yeah, and we work with China, okay? You work with us and we'll work with China. Oh, okay. Now, so on September 2nd and 3rd, there's the Economic Forum in Vladivostok, and Abe has agreed to go there. And a whole bunch of younger parliamentarians in his party are going to go there too. In other words, this is the new wave. This is where we want to get our feet wet in this conference. Now, China is Japan's largest trading partner, and Japan is China's second largest trading partner. So all this atmospherics of confrontation is not affecting the economic relationship.
Back up there, what did you say?
China and Japan are their largest?
No, Japan.
China is Japan's.
China is Japan's largest trading partner. Japan's largest trading partner is China.
Really?
Yes.
That's quite a secret, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
And Japan is China's second largest. So all the smoke, all of the hysteria is going on, but the economic deals are not being affected by that. Okay, now, a new ambassador to China has been appointed by the Japanese government. His name is Yutaka Yokoi. He is extremely fluent in Chinese.
Is he younger or older?
I think he's older. He's been around a while.
Yeah.
And he spent a lot of time in China. And they say he has a very good, nuanced sense of Chinese culture and the Chinese, which is very important if you're going to do business with the Chinese, to know. Now, here comes something else. Obama comes to Tokyo for the G-Summit meeting. Two things happen, which are very significant. The first is, Japan, Abe departed from the usual, we got to save the system mantra, more bailouts and more bailouts, to, hey guys, we need to put some money in the real economy. You know, we need to invest in infrastructure because the Japanese population is not liking the austerity. And so he put this, since it was in Tokyo, he put the proposal on the table. It was rejected by every other country but France. It was rejected by 5, but not France. So he shifted on economic proposals.
Sorry, Paul, is that big too, that France did not reject it?
Probably. But they always
do
their own, we're French.
Exactly.
Okay, we won't go there. You never know what that means, okay? Okay, so now this is, so Obama wants to put a lot of pressure on the Japanese when he's there. So what happens is this employee of the military base in Okinawa, who is a former Marine, is arrested for raping and strangling or murdering a 20-year-old girl, Japanese girl. And this becomes the only news while Obama's there. Okay? And Obama is forced to publicly apologize for this as the main issue. not the TPP, so they stuck it to Obama when he got
Yeah,
there.
that's not an anomaly, Paul, that happens on a regular basis.
Yes, I know that.
Yes.
But they made it the #1 issue. That's the point. Not that that doesn't happen. Okay. Okay. So I don't think these messed up Marines understand how sensitive it is to Japanese culture. You know, particularly if they've done it in other places and then they come and do it in Japan, it doesn't quite. You know, if they did it in Iraq and some other place and then they come to Japan and do it, it's messed up. So if you bring Russia, India, China, Japan in a political, economic, and security dimension of cooperating with each other to resolve whatever problems exist, this is a revolution in Asia. This is a huge revolution in Asia, if you can make it stick. Now, the whole Japanese thing was supposed to spill over into 2 other major countries. And they're not insignificant countries. The Philippines is not an insignificant country, and Vietnam is not an insignificant country. Now, there were elections in the Philippines. This guy from the South, I forgot the name of the city, the main city in the South.
Mindanao?
Yeah, the main city there. It starts with a D or whatever. Anyhow, this guy, his name is Rodrigo Duterte. And if you go online and look him up, it's really wild. He says in 6 months, we're going to get rid of crime in the Philippines. And we're going to kill 10,000 criminals. We're not going to go to court. We're not going to try them in court. We're going to do it through vigilantes. And he did it in his own town, allegedly. He wiped out many of the criminals. Supposedly he has modernized his town, the city of 1.5 million people.
You can't remember the name of the city, eh?
It escapes me.
I'll look it up.
And it's there. If you just look it up on your internet there, you'll see. It's very. Just look up his name, you'll find it. Anyhow, now he represents a different ethnic group than the dominant one that has based out of the area of Manila. He represents a much more southern ethnic group that has a very different language from Tagalog, which is the main language that you're familiar with. So it's a very different group of people in terms of language culture. And they have basically about the same amount, maybe 33 million to 28 million. They're 33 million and 20, but they're in the more impoverished South. So he's coming to, and he is wild. He is preparing to bury, to take the remains of President Marcos, or bury, or whatever. I don't know if it's burying him or whatever, and putting him in the Philippine Heroes, Heroes place. So he's restoring at least he's restoring the idea that Marcos deserves to be known as a hero of the Philippines. Now, who was Marcos? He was the strong man. What did Marcos do? Well, he wanted to industrialize the Philippines. He had already worked, he was working with Japan. You had another strong man earlier in South Korea, Park. They were industrializing their countries. You know, they were too concerned about democracy. They wanted industrialization. So you had this democratic Orange Revolution, overthrew him, Coria Aquino, and her son is the outgoing president. So now you have this wild man coming in who isn't under the control of anybody, as far as we can tell. He's nobody's guy. He's going to kill 10,000 criminals. He's already preparing the police force to go around and hunt them down. and the military and the police forces to go around and hunt them down. He says, we're going to have law and order. We're going to kill the drug mobs. So I don't know what this is all going to mean, but my impression is that the British and the U.S. are not happy by the press that he's getting, the negative press he's getting. Now his appointed foreign minister, when asked about the China situation, he says, well, because they have this whole fishing thing, and they got a court case around the fishing thing, and the Chinese violated this when the fishing thing, and I don't know all the details of it. He says, what are you going to do about that? He says, well, you know, the best thing to do is go talk to the Chinese. we should talk to them, right?
The offshore fishing industry, you mean?
Yeah.
In the South China Sea.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll go talk to the Chinese. Right? Talk to them. So that was his thing. So this is not making the Asia pivot very secure. And then Vietnam, while the Russians are playing on Vietnam's traditional relationship to Russia, to the Soviet Union. Vietnam was always never that close to China, but was always supported by the Soviet Union. So Vietnam has requested to join the Eurasian Union. So the Russians are now coming in the same way with Japan, but with Vietnam, and the courting of Vietnam to be an anti-China is it's not working. So the whole Asia pivot is now on the rocks. So in the middle of all this, you have open discussion now on the Croc-Canal, which is in Thailand, which now involves Thailand and involves that whole area. And the Croc-Canal is the transformation of the Isthmus of Croc. The Thai king was trying to get the French to build a canal back in 1877. So that has a history. The whole Croc-Canal issue has a history. So the Croc-Canal basically changes the whole dynamic economically for China, Japan, Korea, and so forth.
It creates a shortcut.
It's a shortcut, plus you don't have to deal with the Malaccan Straits, which is much more of a problem, and the British don't like that. So,
And where do the British control the choke points there?
Singapore.
Singapore, right?
Yeah. So now we have a situation in Europe where France, Italy, and Germany, there's a lot of motion to, quote, reduce the sanctions with Russia because they're getting hurt. So the whole attempt to create in Europe a hardcore anti-Russian operation is starting to melt. Right? Also because of what Putin did in Syria, the Europeans are seeing that their long-term existence depends on working with the Russians, not with the United States. The long-term existence of Japan depends on working with the Russians, not with the United States. The short-term, immediate threats are one thing, but the long-term survivability is an entirely different matter. And if you want long-term survival, you're not going to get it with current U.S. policy. Okay, so this is where the issue. And one of the things that's alarmed the Japanese is they're starting to go into a severe depopulation issue. So even the Japanese racists are seeing the end of their race if they don't make a shift. They're projecting the population to go down from 125 million down to 76 million by a certain period of time. So if you're a Japanese racist, huh?
That population part, can you see that again, please? I just missed that.
Well, they're not having kids, basically,
Why is that?
because the culture.
That's right, it's huge
They have
suicide
policy
rate.
for it.
Can I just add in
Sure, go
a
ahead.
couple of things? We intervened, I won't get into the whole thing, but we intervened at a Japanese-US business presentation on Monday. And this was one of the things that the Japanese representative went into, and he, population numbers going down is a big issue, but also their youth are so infatuated with Western culture. That's one aspect. Two, they're losing their Japanese language. Their language is actually being degraded. And so the students are coming abroad to go to school. They're not going back to Japan. That's a big issue as well. They're staying here, they're staying in the US and Europe and Canada.
So, now Putin was in Greece and he made it very clear that the activation of the Romanian VMD system, which could be reprogrammed at any time into an offensive system by just changing the program. And he told the Romanians, you know, you're going to find out.
Well, they're going to get special attention.
You're going to get special attention.
Yeah.
Yes. So Putin is playing hardball right now.
Romania is infested with Soros.
Yes.
And Putin has a special hatred for Soros and his
I'm
NGOs.
sure he does. Yeah. I would too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now what's happening is that Ashton Carter, who is the U.S. Defense Secretary, is taking the point on extremely belligerent comments towards China and Russia. Okay? Now, who is Ashton Carter? He is an individual who got a PhD in particle physics. He has never served in the military, and he is the Defense Secretary. He also got a PhD in medieval studies. He has a fascination
He's infatuated with that. Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
So you got a guy who never had military experience, infatuated with medieval studies. Well, what does that mean? It means that he has an incredibly rich fantasy life, going back to the Middle Ages. Fascinated with it. You know, you're welcome to that. You know, fine. You know.
I don't think you want the defense.
But yeah, I don't think I would want you to be the defense secretary. Now,
So just quickly, can you go through the responsibilities of the defense secretary position? Just yeah, I don't know what that.
Responsibility as a
have.
defense secretary and where he lies in the power structure.
okay, that's what I was going to get to.
Okay.
Okay. Some years ago, there was, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was serious concern that a president of the United States could lose it. And this is true after Nixon, too. Could lose it and go rogue and launch a preemptive nuclear war. There became serious concern about that. So a law was passed in the United States which required that the Secretary of Defense had to sign on to any preemptive nuclear strike. And it's always been my contention, okay, so now, if a president wants to do it, he's got to fire his defense secretary who won't sign. And at the time that I was starting to be concerned about Obama, Ashton Carter was the Assistant Secretary of Defense. So I studied him, and I warned about him, because he didn't have any military experience. And he's one of these systems analysis type guys. Well, what happened is he's now Secretary of Defense. And the question is, would he be opposed to signing that agreement, signing an order to launch a preemptive nuclear war? That's what I'm talking about. That's the issue. That's the issue that no one talks about. Because if Chuck Hagel was a previous Secretary of Defense, or Robert, whatever his name was, Robert Gates, who was a previous Secretary of Defense, they would not sign such a thing. You know that. So that's the situation.
It's just the two people?
So So this is very,
They have the final authority.
so this is getting very hairy. And it is, given the fact that Obama will be out of office, it appears that the late summer is going to be the window of opportunity for a nuclear war. And also, this is being triggered by the reality of the collapse of the TPP and the Asian pivot.
They're growing more desperate.
Yeah, it's like collapsing.
Just three things. In November, the TPP is supposed to be ratified. The Paris Accord is all supposed to be ratified in November, I think. And November is the beginning of the fourth quarter when all the third quarter results come out from Wall Street. And that is the clincher. That's the killer for Wall Street. Wall Street's numbers are cooked, or are not cooked.
Well,
Then
okay.
Robbie, what is TPP?
Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Thank you.
Okay, now. So this is why the Russians are being very blunt, and so are the Chinese. And you saw the Chinese foreign minister being very blunt in Canada.
Extremely unusual.
And it's never happened like that before. And he didn't do this because he was trying to be nice to Canada or trying to maintain nice relations with Canada. This was a signal beyond Canada.
What happened?
Okay. There was a visit by the foreign minister of China last Wednesday, I forgot, a few days ago. And the press only found out 24 hours beforehand. He flew in, he met with the, what's his name, Dion, and then he met with Trudeau, and then they did a press conference. And the traditional way they do the press conference is the first question goes to a Canadian reporter who can only ask a question of the Canadian foreign minister. The second question goes to a Chinese reporter who can only ask the question of the Chinese foreign minister. And then it opens up. Now, generally, the Chinese don't like to have a lot of questions at these things because they know what the press is like. So the press teamed up with one guy who asked 3 questions in one thing about the human rights, about this Canadian that's imprisoned who was on the border, who had a coffee shop on the border with China. He's in prison for spying and blah, blah, blah. Huh?
He's a missionary.
Missionary, right? And so forth and so on. And so Dion responded. And then when the Chinese question came up, the foreign minister said, no, I want to respond to the Canadian question. And then he started lecturing. He said, we brought 600 million people out of poverty. He really went off on the rails. How dare you go after our human rights, question. What human rights do you have? Like that kind of thing. I mean, like this kind of thing. And the Canadians were shocked. They've not seen the Chinese do this, ever. And the Chinese don't do that unless they're very angry. And this guy would not have done it if it wasn't for the fact, in my view, that the Chinese are trying to send a message. We're not backing down on anything. If you want to take it to nuclear war, fine, but we're not going to back down. Because the message has got to get across to the policy people in the United States. If you're going to stop a nuclear war, you're not going to stop it by being nice.
The message has to go to the media as well.
Yeah.
They need to know that everyone's going to pay.
Everyone's going to pay.
Can I do a footnote on that, Paul?
Sure.
Just as a footnote, Canada is involved in tremendous human rights violations across the world.
Sure.
We're involved in supporting Nazis and fascists in Ukraine and supplying weapons and arms and training. We're involved in allowing Israel and supporting them to turn Palestine into a concentration camp. We're involved in weapons sales to Saudi Arabia to allow them to continue an illegal war in Yemen and kill women and children by the thousands. We have our special forces that work hand in hand with the American special forces that are involved in illegal activities throughout the world continuously. Assassinations, renditions, killings, they're highly prized. They pick the Canadians first to go with them for anything. So if you're, as a Canadian, you think we're not involved in illegal activities and that we're not supporting fascism and human rights violations, you need to shake your head and think again. We're in it up to our eyeballs, and the empire is going to drag us with them into the Third World War.
Now, the Indian government has now gone to the Canadian government and made an official protest about Canada's training, the training for another round of violence, Sikh violence in India being set up through the British Empire, through the training centers here in BC. The Khalistan Liberation Movement is now actively being revived, and it's being revived out of Vancouver area. And there's a public confrontation by the government of India to the government of Canada.
Sorry, is that connected also with the Indo-Canadian that's been arrested in India, isn't it?
No, that's something else.
That's something else.
No.
That's different, yeah.
No,
Okay.
but this is all very known. But it's the Canadian government. I mean, it's the Indian government that's now pushing it.
It's formally done, yes.
Yeah. So now I have to come to the very unpleasant part of my presentation. Not so much the situation in Canada, but the situation in the United States. Okay. And this implies also Canada, but I'm speaking inferentially of Canada, not direct. We have this whole thing with the 9/11 business, the 28 pages. 50 congressmen are supporting the release of the 28 pages. You have this fight going on in the Congress, but it's not real. It doesn't have the punch. Okay. And you have the revelations about Saudi involvement in 9/11 in the media, and in the 28 pages. And you have the Obama administration saying, well, yeah, we'll release them later. No, we won't. No, they were bogus, you know, and so forth and so on. Where is the hue and cry in the U.S. population about it? The fact that the Saudis actually were involved in killing 3,000 Americans, in attacking. And then we went to war with all these countries, and millions of people have died since then, and all of that. Where's the outrage? Okay. In New York City, there's outrage. But outside of New York City, where's the outrage? You have this incredible revolutionary transformation going on internationally now with these projects for development, which are not, it's not the projects. It's what's happened, it's what's going to happen to the people who are being swept up into these projects. Their whole worldview is changing. They're seeing a future. They're seeing a space program. These billions of people in Asia are going to become world citizens. More cosmopolitan than us Americans or Canadians. Yeah. This is happening. This is a revolution. But it's not a revolution against the United States and Canada or Britain. It's a revolution for humanity, which we can be part of. And I go out and tell American people, the American citizens this, and there's no response. I'm very upset. I'm very disturbed. So I'm not going to give you some Pollyanna bullshit about you know, we're going to have a revolution, and yeah, we're going to have a revolution in the United States, but it's, right now, it's very freaky. What's wrong with these people? What happened to them? These are the people They ran the Peace Corps, wanted to help the world. These are the people that took on the British Empire, took on the Confederacy. What happened to them? And I suspected the turning point was the assassination of McKinley back in 1901. I think that's when the whole shift started to take place. And there's been a very insidious cultural warfare run.
Can I just make a point? There's a very good EIR in the back going through this 100-year period for the United States. That's called 100 Years of Stupidity. We have one copy right now, but it is available online. Every single article in there is worth reading.
Is that the one with my article? Right, okay.
Yeah, including that.
So I'm looking into this as others in our movement are looking into this. How did this happen? How did this happen? There's no reason for it to happen naturally. There's no reason for this to happen naturally. It was imposed, and it was long-term. And Bertrand Russell played a key role. The forces that emerged following the assassination of McKinley in 1901 played a very key role. There were fights with FDR and Kennedy, but after they were out of the way, and after King and Bobby were out of the way, there was nothing to really stop this thing. And this is a deep thing. This is not something that is, oppression, not simple oppression. It's not like an oppression in the third world. It's something has gone wrong, profoundly wrong in the mind and moral and emotion, most of all emotions of the population. And now I'm speaking extemporaneously because I'm not clear. I joined the movement thinking that at some point there would be a wake up of the American people. Now I'm beginning to wonder whether there's going to be any wake up at all, and whether or not we just got to hold the fort to keep a nuclear war from occurring, so that the rest of the world can develop, and then maybe sometime in the future it'll spread to the United States and Canada. I'm saying this. Maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but that's what I'm thinking. And unless we can find a way to, now there is motion in the U.S. There's motion around Glass-Steagall. There's motion around the 28 pages. There's motion in Congress, but there is this FBI thing, and we have to re-examine the whole Federal Bureau of Investigation, the influence it has had on the United States.
Can we talk about a cultural revolution and the role of art, like modernism and postmodernism in art?
That's all part of it.
I've never liked any of that, except for a few. But, I mean...
Most of us didn't buy into it.
That's part of it. Part of it is part of it.
Yeah.
But there's something else. And, well, maybe there isn't anything else. But anyhow, so now we come to this situation in the United States, which is coming upon us like a huge train about to collide into another train. The presidential process. It's starting to get really ugly. It's already was ugly, but now it's going to get ugly.
It gets worse.
You are not going to see any positive proposals emerge now. You're going to see the slinging of crap and mud on an exponential scale between the respective nominees, Hillary and Trump. And the dirt is going to fly. And the population is going to be so degraded by this, because, who has the least dirt? Who is the least depraved? That's who I have to vote for. But neither one of them is really offering a way out. Okay?
Paul, I know we don't like Bernie that much.
No, hold off, I'm gonna get to that.
Okay.
Hold off on that, okay, hold off on that. So not only that, but the Republican National Committee is suing to get the documents from the USIA involving possible unethical activities of Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, involving her foundation's use of U.S. intelligence officials, covert intelligence officials in the USIA. And so they have done a freedom of information, and the judge is going to rule on the 11th of July. Okay. And then there's this other thing with the, there's something else as well going on with with Hillary. Now, Bernie Sanders is staying in the race because Hillary could very well slip on the banana peel. And that's why he's staying in the race. Now, I'm not going to comment on Bernie Sanders. He's not competent to carry out the policies. But God bless him, stay in the race. Bernie, don't leave the race. Stay in there. If Hillary slips on a banana peel, it'll open the door for the convention to come up with an alternative and to have a discussion. Most of all, to have a discussion, because what you don't have is discussions. You don't have party discussions about policy. Had what's his name, O'Malley continued, you would have had some policy discussions. But you don't have policy discussions. You have Hillary. And you have Trump. What, you're going to have a policy discussion with Trump? He's just going to look at you and say,
Tired.
pretty tired. Well, we have a policy. We want to, So, and Trump is FBI. Trump is a FBI. He operates like an FBI bully, you know, belligerent as hell. You know, he's a bully. And these two are going to go at it. And the American people are going to have to be degraded by it. Well, they already are degraded. So what does this do? This creates a situation where Obama can present himself as I am clean, I am pure. I've always been against the Republicans. Baloney.
I'm about to throw up.
You know, I've always been this. I've always been that. He can lie, and he can look sweet. And the gullible people are starting to listen to him, and then they see the election, and they listen to him, and I'm so sweet, you know, and so forth and so on. And this is keeping him with a certain degree of power that he would not otherwise have to launch a war, basically. And that's the problem with the elections. Is you don't have a dialogue about what's going to be done. How are you going to deal with any of this?
Why do you say Bernie's not popular?
Huh?
Why is Bernie not popular?
He's not.
Why?
I know. I know.
Paul, come on.
Yeah, seriously.
You've explained it before very well.
Okay. He does not grasp the picture. He has an issue that he pushes, which is popular at this time, the haves versus the have-nots. He supports Glass-Steagall, finally, he didn't initially, but he's not really clear on what has to be done. He says that whoever gets into the White House, it doesn't matter, because it's rigged. Yes, it's rigged. So what are you going to do, Bernie? Are you going to, what difference does it make having you in the White House and not having you in the White House, if it's rigged? And then he says, well, when all the American people get up and decide to unrig it, then it won't be unrigged. And my campaign is to get the American people to unrig it. So what's he proposing to do? He's not proposing to do anything. He's not, from what I know of him, he is not competent to carry out an organizing job, to bring various forces together, to carry out the policies required. He is the most radical environmentalist running. His idea of full employment is to shut down nuclear and coal and go all solar and windmills.
Yep, just pull the plug on everything. That's his plan. And he's anti-Putin, anti-Russian.
Very.
And he's anti-Russian and anti-Putin.
And he came out publicly. I've been very torn about him, but I have reached clarity. He has come out in support of Obama's drone program. He's come out despite all the rhetoric about him voting against war, he's actually voted for most of the wars. He is in support of the Ukraine government. His foreign policy is backwards and upside down. 1. 2, he has put in two people. He's gotten two Bernie supporters now in the DNC. One is Cornel West. Cornel West, as far as I can tell, he's a great guy. He's a great organizer, right? But he's also put in Bill McKibben.
Huh?
He has put in Bill McKibben is now in the DNC. Bill McKibben is Green Satan. Bill McKibben. He's Green Satan.
Okay.
He runs a website and an organization called 350.org. It is deep green resistance, essentially. And so these people are not just green. They are green, promoting radical extremism for the Greens. And he has gotten him in to the DNC. That really scares me. But
So he has an ideological orientation. He is not a person that can work a deal to work. He can't bring other people in. He has an ideological orientation.
well, if I could just make a point, it's kind of like, and I understand what you're saying. He's either putting on a show and he doesn't really believe what he's doing, or he does, and if he does believe what he's doing, then he's extremely confused. Because just like, Ron Paul promoting Glass-Steagall, but then promoting, the other economic policies.
Oh, by the way, he was against Glass-Steagall.
Ron Paul came out for Glass-Steagall.
Oh, he did. Okay.
You did, finally, yes, you did. But the two ideologies are contradictory.
Not consistent.
So that means that the person doesn't have a grasp of the ideas, right? And it's the same thing with the green thing. Like, so he's promoting Glass-Steagall, but then he wants everybody working, $10 an hour cleaning off solar panels in the middle of winter. That's their job, I mean, literally, these solar and wind jobs are like, it's just BS, so.
Meanwhile, solar and wind's crashing all over the world when they instituted in big numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And in Ontario, they're paying the highest prices anywhere in North America for electricity, 4 times what any of the rest of us are paying. and they have a $33 billion debt, and they've had to invest in nuclear energy, all because of Maurice Strong and Al Gore getting involved with the Canadian government, and particularly with the Ontario government, and sold them on wind and solar. And they committed big time to wind and solar, and while they were trying to kill nuclear.
But all good points, but what I'm trying to get at is Bernie's not competent because he can't differentiate between these. He doesn't see how these two ideas are contradictory.
Yeah, he's not consistent.
He's not, yeah.
Did you mean Rand Paul or Ron Paul?
Yeah, Ron Paul came out for Glass-Steagall. I don't know about Rand Paul, but.
Sorry, my burning question though was about the people who support him. I don't know if this is true, but I got the impression that it's a lot of young people who think he's the only sane option.
His supporters are an Obama base and an Occupy base. He has gotten a lot of people, I think, who either previously not old enough to vote, who are now old enough to vote, and also people who didn't vote before, and also the Social Democrats and the.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they'll get pissed off if he doesn't get the nomination.
Well, I saw that potential at the Democratic Party
There's your chance.
in Washington State, where I was at a convention. I saw that potential.
Yeah.
So yeah, but real potential violence coming from the Sanders crowd.
You're saying, Paul, there's no sane option at all, period.
Huh?
There's no sane option.
Right. No, the Sanders, within the Sanders crowd, you got all the anarchists, all of the World Trade Organization riders,
Which Occupy.
all your Black Bloc people.
And Bill McKibben, by the way, is very tied into that Occupy, Black Bloc, anarchist movement.
So you could very well see very violent aspects to this, which so all of that is there.
It would be rampant violent though. It wouldn't be like the storm onto Capitol Hill and demand.
Not, I mean, perhaps not organized, no.
Yeah.
Or organized.
Because that's what we
yes.
would want.
Well, the violence would probably take place during the elections,
Absolutely.
after the nominations, and it would just be violent, and then that might give an excuse for a military dictatorship. I don't know, but that's also something that I'm thinking about. People are thinking about what kind of violence is going to be unleashed, and you have also Donald Trump. He's capable of he's a rabble rouser. He could trigger a lot of violence too.
He already is.
Yeah. So you got a lot. You got a real mess on your hands, and we can't determine what the outcome is going to be on that level, but we have to determine a higher outcome. And right now, what I said earlier is, if we can keep the nuclear war from occurring and allow the consolidation of the world around this new paradigm, eventually it's going to hit the United States. But it's not going to hit the political layers first. It's going to hit the business layers first, the business people. Those are the ones who are going to talk to us.
And
Those are the ones who want to do business. They're the ones who want to build something. They're the ones who want to manufacture something. They're the ones who want to get in with China because it's in their interest to get in with China or get in with whatever. And that's key. Those are the layers that have to, that I think we're going to have to reach. And I think we're trying to reach and will reach. Because those are the layers that aren't ideologically oriented. They are oriented towards the nuts and bolts of the survival of their business or the survival of the economy. And that's not coming from the masses who are being treated to this spectacular drama, this sickening drama that is now unfolding. These people don't care about that. They want to do business. And they're the ones that you have, that are opening up now to China and Russia and these other places. And that's gonna be the biggest opening right there. And the fact that you can't do business with Russia or you can't do business with China pisses them off. Because they meet with the Chinese and they meet with the Russians, they say, "What? There's nothing wrong with these people. They're capitalists like us." You know, they want to do business. What's wrong with that? I'm sorry, I'm saying you're talking like that, but you know, they're not pushing communism. They're not trying to run us. They're not trying to control us. They want to do business. You know, why would they want to do business with the United States? Well, we got an educated workforce, Canada. We got an educated workforce. We got raw materials. We got tremendous potential. I mean, the Chinese are going to have to come in and set up factories soon, because we're going to be a source of cheap labor. I mean, or let's put it this way: we have a skilled workforce. They're going to need a skilled workforce. You know, do business. I don't know. I mean, it's really. I'm having a lot of trouble right now. I'm out in the streets in Seattle, and I'm sharing some of my angst with you guys. I shouldn't necessarily do that, but I am.
It's okay.
Well,
Okay, go ahead.
The Senate and the Congress,
Huh?
the new Congress, the people that are running for Congress, are they better quality? Is there any hope?
What's this?
In the Congress, the new Congress is going to be elected. Do you see any new people being elected in the Congress or the Senate that are going to be?
I can't imagine the new congressman being any better. I can only imagine them being worse.
Well, there will be some.
You are expert in
I'm sorry about that. Because they're younger. That's why. I'm biased against you. No, it's okay. No, we have one guy who's a state senator who went and met with Richard Black. He went and met with Assad. And there's a Washington Post article about him that they said, well, it's kind of strange. You would expect him to come under massive ridicule, but he's now on the speaking circuit. Everybody wants to know what he found out. What happened.
Who interviewed him first?
Jeff Steinberg. It's an excellent interview, by the way. So we have a few people like that who are courageous, who don't give a damn. This guy is a fanatic anti-abortion guy. And he's been waging a war against abortion, and everybody says, why are you doing that? Because he believes in it. He doesn't believe in abortion. You know. Well, here he is fighting, you know, exposing the whole game. In an interview with Jeff Steinberg, he's exposing everything. He's laying it all out. They plan to do this. The whole thing is, you know, it's incredible. And he was a former Marine colonel. And he's supposed to be this psycho-conservative. And he's meeting with, you know, with Assad. So that's an example of one person who decided, okay, I've had enough crap. I'm going to use whatever leverage I have in my position to do this. And it's a personal thing. It's a personal thing about integrity, about honesty, and about truth. And that is what we need from some of these politicians.
I want to get back to that Chinese guy that railed on Canadians.
Yeah.
The foreign minister?
Yeah. I want to ask, when there's a press conference, how calculated is it? Like, would that have been something that they had decided they would do beforehand, or would it just have been the question that just got him angry and he just...
It would have been the question got him angry, yes.
But they planned it. They planned that question.
That's what I'm just
That was an ambush.
wondering. How,
It was an ambush, yeah. The press ambushed him.
okay.
They got together and they picked a guy among themselves to ask the questions, and they got together and asked. The entire Canadian press did that.
So China would not have known it would
Huh?
happen. China would not have known it would have happened before that?
No.
It would have been read at that
No.
time? Yeah.
But the fact that he responded meant that the line was crossed.
And did that mean that that's what China had planned to do, or would it have just been?
No, I don't think it was a plan, no, it's
He was
like,
reacting to it.
huh?
He was reacting to
It's
it.
but he's reacted to it because he wasn't gonna, you push somebody too far, they can't just sit there and take it. The destruction would be far greater if they sat there and take it. You know,
Well, just to reiterate that, like, the question actually wasn't posed to him. The question was posed from the Canadian journalist, the Canadian foreign minister.
And then he said, I want.
And then he said, I'm gonna address that question, because the question was, how can we justify doing business with China when they've got such horrible human rights?
No, one thing that strikes me in the whole thing that I think he's trying to lay out is saying, how dare you, the inherent racism of the question,
Yeah.
which he responded by saying, don't you think the Chinese have a say in human rights for their own country? Right? I mean, it's going back on two fronts and saying, we've developed economically, and now there's political forces within the country we have to deal with. Number one, when you've got a higher level of education, you've gone out of an agrarian economy, number one. And number two, he's addressing the inherent racism and ignorance, well, the racism that's in the United States and Canada that we deal with on a daily basis. The image that people have of China is peasant immigrant people who have no taste, who have nothing, right? And yet they're good enough to do our dirty work. They built the country. And so he's kind of saying to me in his response, who in the fuck do you think you are?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Go down to East Hastings, you want to see.
It actually goes.
but it's never, this is never done. This is in a diplomatic context.
That's what I was getting at is.
This is highly
That's why-
diplomatic at the highest level.
So why then? What, it would just be that he was angry.
Well,
No.
Insulted.
He might have,
Can I?
Go ahead.
I'll just phrase it. Because we've attended a couple of Chinese, Canadian diplomatic presentations and stuff. And the theme over and over again is that the Chinese are very proud of the progress that they've made. And they have made that progress despite all the operations and all of the pressures against them economically, politically, culturally from the West. They have really worked hard. And their politics, because of the way their government is structured, like not everybody in the government is from this. We're used to people in the government being from this privileged class. That's not the case. Like Xi Jinping grew up in a work camp somewhere in China when he was younger. Yeah, I can't remember his exact history, but he didn't grow up in a privileged, environment. And so it's a cultural thing as well. Like his response was, how dare you not acknowledge everything that we have done despite all the BS we've had to put up from you.
Now, it may have been planned. I'm not going to say it wasn't planned. I'm not going to say it wasn't. It could have been planned. It could have been delivered. It could very well have been because like you said, the question wasn't asked of him. It was asked of the Canadian. It was an attack on the Canadian lack of response to the Chinese, human rights issue. So it could have been delivered, and it could be, and it could be delivering a message that we're not playing the same. The world has changed. The message is you're no longer running the world. You white Anglo-Saxon, transatlantic region, you're not running the world anymore. You got to treat us as equals.
And this is the
That's-
message you're getting.
That could be what you're saying. But you gotta change your attitude towards this, you know.
It was an intervention on the news as well, because the way Russia and China are treated is like there's one human rights violation,
After
and they all
another.
focus on that one. Oh, look at we gotta, and they never look at the rest of what's happening in there. So he comes out and says, well, actually, we've done all this good, so screw the one thing that you think we're guilty of.
It also goes back a lot farther before the building of the Three Gorges Dam. They were already, when they were talking about 1 million Chinese being displaced so that dam could be built, there was 1 million human rights violations already cooking up back then.
Yeah.
And so now they have 600,000 that have been brought out of poverty, probably out of those million poor people that had to be
Exactly.
displaced.
I've seen many
Yeah.
documentaries where they have hired people specifically who go into these villages where there's only gravel road in, and they're cultural liaisons where they're not going in to try and bribe these people or say, well, if you don't want in, then go in the bush. That's not what they're doing. They're actually trying to bring these people in. They're trying, and have done a good job of actually modernizing through culture and language. And some of these big development projects, what they're doing is the companies are making a point of putting, if they do have construction workers coming in who don't speak Cantonese, so they put Mandarin speakers together and they put Cantonese speakers together, and if they can, they will put workers from the same village together so that they're not isolated and alone, because they understand that this is a huge transformation for the culture specifically, and the emphasis on classical music and all of that. So they've got a broad spectrum to think about, but they are dealing with it in a thoughtful way.
Okay.
Typically, the Western media, when it wants to go to war, they start the process of demonizing Sherry. So when they wanted to go to war with Saddam Hussein, it starts about 2 or 3 years before where they start to demonize that person, and they start to publicly character assassinate, and they start to point out every little personal detail where they can create this kind of atmosphere of hate and fear and loathing of that person. And for the last 3 years, what we've had is a demonization of Russia and China. At every opportunity that the Western press can, they can embarrass them, or they can make them look bad, or they can present something that makes them look bad, because they want to go to war with them. And so they have to justify that to their populations. And so as we run up to a war, that demonization becomes more intense, and they start to do things like ambush somebody in a diplomatic situation where they normally would never do that. And that was done to embarrass the Chinese because they didn't think he would answer, because typically, diplomatically, he would have answered the Chinese guy asking the question to him. He said, no, I don't want to answer the question to my guy asking me, the Chinese guy. I want to answer his question, the Canadian guy that just posed the question to the Canadian foreign minister.
It seems like it wasn't staged.
So this is a
He
completely
didn't
going
want
off script.
Yeah.
In other words, you're going off script completely.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a challenge and it's
So
a
in
slight,
other words,
it's an insult to
He's
you.
not willing to let it,
He wasn't willing to let it slide, that's right,
Okay.
Yeah.
yes.
Now,
which is.
go ahead. After you, I'm going to drop a bombshell on you guys, but go ahead.
Good, I'm sitting down then. Are we heading into another Guns of August? I mean,
Yes.
That's the way I
Yes.
perceive it.
Absolutely.
And I wondered if I dreamt this, but I know I heard Obama say that there was something that he was planning, but he wasn't going to discuss it until August. And I tried to go onto the net to find out Obama plans for August. And he said specifically he wasn't going to talk about it now, but there was something, some kind of announcement that was going to come out in
Well, I'm
August.
certain
Which could
Putin
be anything.
knows about it.
I
Okay?
beg pardon?
Certain what?
I'm certain Putin knows about it.
Yeah.
What is, for us stupid people, me, what is Guns of August?
I can answer that. Typically, First World War, Second World War, they start the wars in August and September. This run up to the First World War and the run up to the Second World War. So you do a mass build-up and you do the political, and economic
You
sanctions.
just made this sound like this is this man promoting WrestleMania during Survivor Series, is what you just basically said.
Yeah.
That is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, propaganda.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Historically, that's
I
correct.
just want to make sure I understand correctly.
Oh, wrestle. Sorry.
Okay, this is gonna get very provincial. Okay. You rarely hear me talk about provincial matters. BC being BC. However, I won't go into the details of how I found this out, but there's something very significant that you need to know about British Columbia. And British Columbia has a place called Rupert, which is the closest port to China and Japan, number one. If you connect up the rail infrastructure from Rupert into the Canadian, you essentially connect up the entire ability to have a maritime Silk Road from
Prince Rupert.
China to BC, to the rest of North America.
Yeah, this is the gateway.
Number one. Number two, the most populous province in Canada, in China, and accounts for 40% of the exports from China, is Guangdong province, with the capital, what used to be called Canton, near Hong Kong. So it's near Hong Kong, Guangzhou. BC is the sister province to Guangdong. Vancouver is the sister city to Guangzhou. Okay.
What does it mean?
And then you have Hong Kong. And where are a good chunk of the Hong Kong Chinese? They're in BC. Now, does Eastern Canada consider itself part of the New Silk Road? No. Or the Maritime Silk Road? Does the Prairie Provinces consider themselves part of the New Silk Road? No. BC is emerging as the gateway to Asia for the New Silk Road. Maritime Silk Road. That's not the Bering Strait.
Once again,
Hold
for
on.
stupid people,
What?
what is Silk Road, please? Just
What?
Silk Road.
What?
Define Silk Road for me, please.
It's a metaphor
For,
the old Silk Road that used to.
The ancient trading routes.
thank you, that's what I want to make sure. I want to make sure we're on the same
Yeah.
page, okay?
Okay, so the number one leader of Guangdong Province, who also heads the Communist Party in Guangdong Province, who also is in the leadership of China, and is being considered one of the three people to emerge on the standing committee who will later replace,
Xi Jinping.
came to BC. And last Wednesday, a memorandum of understanding was signed between Guangdong Province and BC Province to make BC the gateway
This
to
is public?
the gateway.
This is public knowledge?
Yeah, yeah. The memorandum of understanding was signed
Who's that?
Between who?
between the province of BC, our premier,
Yep.
and the Guangdong, head of Guangdong province, signed a memorandum of understanding designating BC as the gateway to North America.
Is this
All right.
what you mean by sister? Is that,
Huh?
is that what you mean by sister province?
Huh?
No,
Is that what-
no,
What
they're,
is sister province?
so there's
Yeah.
lots of, they're all over the world. There are cities that will be sister cities. And they have a ceremony and they have a plaque and everything. places, like Abbotsford's sister city is one in Japan, I think. And, yeah,
Never heard of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is just a
They
common
just-
thing. And
They
so,
just pick,
yeah, kind of. They pick cities that have like similar geography, similar.
Okay.
It's like this room
Now.
area.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
Yes, that is an example.
Okay.
of it.
This goes back in,
Now-
history with Asia.
this memorandum of understanding is now, they're gonna work for a memorandum of understanding between Guangzhou and Vancouver as well. In other words, there are people who recognize that this is a Pacific situation and that BC is critical to not just Canada, but to all of North and South, North America. And given the United States' difficulty for this to develop in Seattle, which is where the natural place would be in the United States, this is what's emerging.
Perhaps I should probably just ask this question.
Huh?
Because we travel in different circles, there's a lot of things that you say are foreign to me, and I'm like, wow. And a lot of things, a lot of things that I know are foreign to you. This is not foreign to me at all. And so I just kind of trying to figure out understanding from the LaRue's point of view, why is it all of a sudden news now? I guess is the question. Like, what's the mindset with that?
Well, maybe you know all of this, and we did it.
Okay.
What do you know? What are you saying? Which part?
The whole China and British Columbia thing. Like you could never go to Seattle first. You have to go to British Columbia. It's
Yeah, I know that.
But they've been planning.
But the Chinese want to also do the same with Seattle,
Yeah, I understand that.
but they're having trouble.
Understood, and there's a lot behind that. I was just assuming, Vancouver's always the first for everything in regards to all sorts of plans these elitists have, so I just assumed that everybody in LaRue's kind of knew that already.
Well, there's a difference between planning, because we already have trade with China, right? This is different. This is qualitatively different. And if you don't know the plans for the World Land Bridge,
Okay.
which is the same as the Silk Road,
Okay.
that's key here.
Now this
The
is
gateway to
where.
the Silk Road, you need to learn about.
Okay.
Okay, wait for the Silk Road. Thank you.
So this is where the confrontation between the empire and the new paradigm is going to be taking place in BC.
great.
Because it's new economics.
Okay.
It's a new economic system.
And the confrontation is that of preventing any of the ports from being developed, the infrastructure to those ports, plus whatever pipelines or whatever would come into play, is now being organized by the British Empire to block this development in BC. So all of this is being vectored, not because they just want to stop development, it's because this involves China in a very big way.
So they're gonna take us out.
Huh?
They're gonna take us out, is what you're telling us. They're gonna take us out. Vancouver would be bombed. Is that what you're saying?
No, no. I'm
He's
saying,
talking economics.
the use of the environmentalists and the attempt to use the indigenous
But
people
I'm
as a
saying
cover
where the empire-
for stopping these
This is
developments.
the spot
Paul,
where the empire.
when we went down for the Chinese New Year's
Isn't that what you're
parade,
saying?
Yeah.
we distributed, and we went to the International Village to have something to eat.
Yeah,
Well, there are flags,
Challenge.
like all over the place, like there's flags with a panda on it, and there's, decorative on lampposts. Well, there is one flag up there that's called Silk Road Way. There's more than one of these decorative
Canada?
flags. I think that's what you call them.
Oh, I need this repeated or clarified. Christy Clark signed
It's
this?
already been signed last week, yes.
yeah.
Yeah. This all has to do with LNG, it has to do with oil, it has to do with them being a super port in Prince Rupert, which was
Yeah,
planned
they
since
would never-
1901, basically,
Yeah.
you know.
Who's Christy Clark then? I mean, this is confusing.
She,
Ula. Okay, somebody's paying her. She goes with, yeah, okay.
And also, one of the
Is that not strategic enough?
PC school curriculum system for a
A
long
what?
I've heard that before, maybe
Yeah, PC school curriculum
No,
system
so
for a long
there's a
time.
difference
BC.
between.
The same curriculum as BC, at one time, long time.
Before,
The school system,
kind of
Yeah,
they go back and forth.
yeah. So for a long time, like for
Student
decades
exchanges?
now.
strategy and
So-
actual.
Yeah, there's also memorandum of understanding on education.
On education, that was the other
Or,
one.
that's a.
Yeah.
They did one on education as well. Because the curriculums are similar.
Yeah, our new curriculum is
In
weird.
economic world,
I don't think, so
is.
I don't think they want it, no.
that's a
Would it-
whole
would
other,
it- Would the Vancouver Port be
Well-
a major?
Actually, Winnipeg
Well-
would be hit. Winnipeg would be hit first. Winnipeg is the center of, it's got the international airport, everything that comes into Canada from Russia and it comes over the North Pole into Winnipeg first. Most, yes, because Winnipeg is central, so everything goes out east and west from Winnipeg. If they cut off transportation from Winnipeg, Canada's fucked.
Oh.
Winnipeg would be the first hit.
That just gets back down to the original question. How do we stop the empire from existing?
Can I actually bring up something to do with your question, which also has to do with your question
Go for it.
earlier, which I think is very.
Speak a little louder.
I think it's very important because it's the question of culture, right? And art. And I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there, and I'd love to hear what anybody else thinks about this because, in my experience, and it's a good experience, but it's limited in the sense of like, you know, corporations, but also in the young people that I see and the experience in dealing with Occupy is they don't give a shit. When you're talking to people in the States, they don't give a shit about development. And they don't care about that, nor do they understand what amazing benefits can happen, is because it's so, the green message is so internalized that development is bad, that, you know, and the art reflects that. The music reflects that. We are parasites on the planet. We care more about apes in zoos than we do about Africans and even our own homeless, right? Like, and the art and the culture have been so vectored into this minuscule little
Concept, yeah.
yeah, it's so isolated, and in that isolation is people who are depressed and suicidal and on drugs.
The assistance of the British and the United States with probable involvement of a number of U.S. troops. And so now, of these four, three were adopted and to be put on the table as part of the negotiations demands. It was all minus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization one. Now, this is profound. Not because it's an immediately an earth-shaking thing in and of itself, but it's profound because you have ideas coming to a person who decides to take initiative and intersects the situation. Now, he did have a meeting with the Russian ambassador at the airport and the chargé d'affaires. Of course, the Russian ambassador can't be in Sana because of whatever. So the chargé d'affaires in Sana is supposed to stay in touch with him. Now, what's significant about this is that the last two times we had this kind of approach to try to resolve these kind of conflicts was the original Oasis plan by LaRouche in the late 70s to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which he was organizing for in the late 70s, and it was also going to be part of the Reagan administration. And the idea was establish an economic orientation so that you have the basis for the warring parties to have a mutual benefit or a mutual reason to want to surmount whatever differences they have. In other words, create the common basis for, in the economics, to override all the other ethnic, religious, or whatever issues, right? Now, in the Palestinian conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, LaRouche met with the former foreign minister of Israel, Abba Eban, who said, hey, this would work except for one thing. And LaRouche asked him, well, why? He says, you do not appreciate the quality of insanity that exists in the highest places of...
The quality of insanity.
Yes, that exists in the highest places of power.
No, most people don't.
And the Iraqis supported it privately, but we can't do it publicly because of the hatred for Israel. And so we organized for this thing. Eventually, when Clinton came in, this approach actually was put in the Oslo Accords. The initial Oslo Accords were based upon an economic policy, and then an agreement was made between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and eventually Bibi Netanyahu came to power, that was the end. But there was another factor, is that the International Monetary Fund intervened and wrecked all of the economic agreements that would have created Palestinian-Israeli benefit to the point where they would override the manipulation of, the manipulation. So this is, now, the point about this current situation is that the International Monetary Fund ain't around for this. You have the new entities coming in, the new development bank, and so forth and so on, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's a whole different world. That's not the old IMF, which screwed this whole thing up. It was that, plus the assassination of Rabin, prevented an actual process whereby the Palestinians and the Israelis would now be living together, and they wouldn't be having all these issues, because they would be benefiting, because Israel has a high-tech engineering capability, and the Palestinians have also a very, very skilled labor force. I mean, they would be an industrial engine for the area, but it didn't happen just because of Israelis or Palestinians, but because the international crowd sabotaged Clinton's President Bill Clinton, who was in favor of this, but he was too weak to carry it through, to override the international power. He was too weak. So now, if you look at Yemen, a place that is not on the radar screen of most Americans, probably not on the radar screen of all Americans and most Canadians. It's a very strategically located place on the coast, going into the Red Sea, going into the Suez Canal, and going out to the main oil lanes. It's a very strategic place, number one. Number two, it has been a place of confrontation and war, initially between the Cold War. There was a battleground. It was a battleground during the Cold War, okay, and then it became a battleground later on. And just to give you a sense of this, an offshoot of the main Shia religious group, which became known as Zaydism, established in the 10th century a ruling system based on an imam, a hereditary imam. And that continued on into the modern period. And that's in the northern part. And this northern imam initially joined with Egypt, Iraq, and Syria into what's called the United Arab republic. There was an attempt to create a united Arab republic of these four countries. Well, in my view, they probably should have just tried to be United Arab Friends rather than United Arab Republic, because it got to be a mess, with Egypt involved in the politics of Syria and Iraq and political parties and everything else. And then the West launched a war against these people, against this inside, and then there was all kinds of things happened. It got very confused. But the point is that this situation was never resolved. And what made it worse is that the Saudis in their repressive society, good evening, today is the 4th of June here in Vancouver at the BC LaRouche chapter of the International LaRouche Movement. All right, tonight we have a complete revolution that is taking place that has no precedent in the history of humanity, and my intention tonight is to give you a sense of this. It is spectacular, yet the news has not yet arrived for the US and Canadian population. And we don't know if even if the news did arrive for the US and Canadian population, that they would find any emotional connection to the news. But it will arrive to the Canadian and US population. It may take a while for it to penetrate the dense fog, but it is coming. Now, I'll start with the case of a gentleman who is a Yemeni. He's a gentleman in Yemen. He's not a government official. He's not some military leader. His name is Fawad al-Ghafani. And he created a private organization called the Advisory Office for Coordination with the BRICS. And we might have a discussion on creating something like that in Canada. The advisement, because we'll discuss it later.
It's so exciting.
Because
What a young people.
because it's not an official government agency. It's just helping the process. And he got a hold of this from our friend in Sweden, the Iraqi Hussein Askari. He translated the Lambridge report, and he began doing televised public readings of the report, bringing a lot of people in to be participant in the reading publicly. And eventually, after a few months, he was asked to speak to a conference of about 500 to 700 people in Yemen, in the capital of Sana'a, on something called the National Forum for Financial Assessment, which involved the entire Ministry of Finance, the military leader of the rebels, with the last name Houthi, and other major government officials, including the Prime Minister, and civil society organizations and what have you. And in his presentation, he proposed, because one of the things that they were doing was discussing how they were going to approach the issue of resolving the conflict through negotiations, which are going on in Kuwait, between the so-called rebels, the Houthi rebels, and the alleged government of Yemen in exile. Okay, the so-called Houthi rebels, and so he proposed 4 recommendations that should be put in to the discussion of ending the conflict. One of those was for Yemen to become part of the New Silk Road. Another one was for Yemen to join the BRICS. A third one was for Yemen to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the fourth one was that Yemen must establish a national bank of reconstruction, run by Yemen, of course, to help finance rebuilding Yemen because of, well, it needed to be built anyhow, but now it really needs to be built. And especially when you consider that 2.8 million people have been displaced by the war, waged upon Yemen by Saudi Arabia with